A racist restaurant owner in a MAGA hat, an American black woman, an everyday experience turned into a high-stakes situation. Get ready for a story that unravels the type of prejudice that black people go through every day, unseen and hidden. Alicia Brown stepped through the door, her confident stride commanding attention. Behind the podium stood Timothy Carter, his red MAGA hat perched prominently atop his head. Its bold lettering seemed out of place against the restaurant's refined decor, but perfectly suited the smug smirk spreading across his face as his eyes landed on Alicia. He leaned forward slightly, sizing her up. "Good afternoon," Alicia said smoothly, her voice calm but firm. "Table for one, please." Timothy straightened, a mocking smile creeping onto his face. "We're full," he said briskly, tapping a finger against the reservation book without even looking. Alicia arched an eyebrow, glancing toward the dining area where at least 6 tables sat empty, their linens crisp and untouched. She gestured subtly in their direction. "I see several open seats. Surely you can accommodate me." Timothy leaned on the podium, his eyes narrowing. "Those tables are reserved." "For the lunch rush?" Alicia replied, her tone measured. "It seems quiet for that." Timothy's smirk deepened, his voice dropping to a cold drawl. "Look, lady, I don't think this is the kind of place for you. Maybe try somewhere more casual." Alicia stiffened but didn't flinch. The tension in the room thickened as a few patrons glanced her way, some avoiding eye contact entirely. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice low and deliberate. Timothy chuckled darkly, gesturing dismissively with one hand. "I said we're full. That's the end of it. You people always push until it becomes a problem." The murmurs grew louder, the restaurant's ambiance giving way to an uncomfortable silence. Alicia met his gaze, her dark eyes steady and unwavering. "I have every right to dine here, and you know it," she said, her voice sharp with restrained anger. "Well, not today you don't," Timothy shot back, his words slicing through the air. Alicia remained rooted in place, her calm composure an anchor against the storm brewing at Carter's Steakhouse. Timothy's smug expression deepened under the glaring red of his MAGA hat, the bold slogan practically daring her to push back. "I don't see any reason why I can't be seated," Alicia said, her tone measured but firm. "Unless you're implying there's a reason beyond reservations and policy?" Timothy let out a low chuckle, folding his arms across his chest. "I don't owe you an explanation. My restaurant, my rules. And I've decided you're not dining here today. End of discussion." Alicia's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "You're refusing to seat me for no legitimate reason. I'd like to hear an explanation for that." A couple of nearby patrons shifted in their seats, their hushed conversations growing louder as they watched the exchange. A middle-aged man whispered something to his wife, glancing nervously between Timothy and Alicia. Timothy's smirk widened. "Oh, you want an explanation?" he said mockingly. "Fine. Let's just say we try to maintain a certain atmosphere here. We're not exactly the kind of place where people like you fit in." The room fell silent. A sharp intake of breath came from one of the waitstaff near the kitchen, who quickly busied themselves polishing an already spotless glass. Alicia's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag, but her voice remained firm. "People like me?" she repeated, forcing Timothy to clarify his thinly veiled insult. "Don't act like you don't know what I mean," Timothy snapped, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're making a scene. Why don't you take that attitude somewhere else? There's a fried chicken joint down the road. Might be more your speed." Alicia's blood boiled, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of a visible reaction. She glanced at the patrons, now fully tuned into the argument, their gazes shifting awkwardly between her and Timothy. "I'd like your name," Alicia said, pulling out her phone and holding it up. "And I'd like you to repeat what you just said for the record." Timothy froze for a moment, his face tightening. Then he sneered, jabbing a finger at the phone. "You think you can come in here and intimidate me with that?" His voice rose, loud enough to carry through the entire dining room. "Go ahead. Record it. Post it. I don't care. People are sick of your kind playing victim." Gasps erupted from a few tables, One older woman whispered harshly to her companion, "He's gone too far this time." Alicia pressed record, her camera squarely on Timothy's face. "So, just to be clear," she said, her voice steady, "you're refusing to serve me because of people like me. Would you like to elaborate?" "You heard me," Timothy barked, his face reddening beneath the brim of his hat. "And if you don't leave right now, I'll have you thrown out." "Don't think I won't." Alicia's lips curled into a tight smile, her phone still recording. "Thrown out? For trying to eat in a restaurant? Or is there something else you'd like to add?" At that moment, the tension in the room became unbearable. A younger waiter hesitated near the podium, his eyes darting between Alicia and Timothy, unsure whether to intervene. Timothy's wife, Margaret, peeked out from the back office, her face pale as she took in the scene. "Get out!" Timothy bellowed, pointing toward the door. "I'm done wasting time on you. You're not welcome here." "I'll leave when you explain why I'm not welcome here," Alicia shot back, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the room. "That's it!" Timothy yelled, slamming his fist on the podium. "I'm calling the cops." The words hung in the air like a threat. Alicia didn't flinch. "Good. Call them," she said, lowering her phone but keeping it recording. "I'll wait right here, and we'll let them decide if it's legal for you to deny service based on race." Timothy froze again, his confidence wavering for the first time. His eyes darted to the patrons, several of whom were now watching him with wide eyes, their unease palpable. "You want to play that game?" Timothy growled, his voice lower now. "Fine. You'll regret this." He stormed toward the phone on the wall, his footsteps echoing loudly. Alicia stood tall, her phone capturing every moment. The restaurant seemed to hold its collective breath, the murmurs of the diners fading into silence as they waited to see what would happen next. The restaurant sat in a tense, uncomfortable silence as Timothy picked up the phone, his MAGA hat casting a shadow over his face. He pressed the receiver against his ear, glaring at Alicia as though daring her to stop him. "You want the cops involved?" he spat, his voice venomous. "Fine. I'll make the call. Let's see how much you like causing trouble when they show up." Alicia didn't move. Her phone remained steady in her hand, the camera trained on Timothy. "Go ahead," she said coolly. "Be sure to tell them exactly why you're calling." Timothy's knuckles whitened around the receiver, his bravado faltering slightly under her unwavering gaze. "Hello? Yeah? I've got a problem at Carter's Steakhouse," he began, his voice rising theatrically for effect. "There's a woman here causing a scene, refusing to leave after I've asked her to multiple times. She's being disruptive and aggressive." "Disruptive and aggressive?" Alicia repeated, her tone even but loud enough to carry across the room. She turned her phone slightly, panning to show the hushed, still patrons sitting at their tables, wide-eyed and silent. Timothy shot her a glare, his free hand clenching into a fist. "Yeah, that's right," he said into the phone, his words clipped. "She's filming me, too, trying to intimidate me. Can you send someone over?" He slammed the phone down without waiting for a response. Alicia folded her arms, her voice calm but edged with steel. "You just called the police on me because I wanted to sit and eat. You know that's harassment, don't you?" Timothy barked a harsh laugh, the sound echoing off the restaurant's polished wood walls. "Harassment? Lady, I'm the one being harassed here. You think you can come in, disrupt my business, and play the victim? Not happening. You're refusing service to me because of my race," Alicia said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "And now you're trying to use law enforcement to intimidate me. That's not just harassment. It's illegal." Timothy's face turned an alarming shade of red. But before he could respond, one of the patrons stood up. A middle-aged woman with neatly styled blonde hair and a designer handbag slung over her shoulder spoke up hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been sitting here watching this and—" "Mind your own business," Timothy snapped, his voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "This has nothing to do with you." The woman's lips tightened, but she sat back down, casting a sympathetic glance at Alicia. Timothy turned back to Alicia, jabbing a finger in her direction. You want to make this about race? Fine. I don't care. Call it whatever you want. But this is my restaurant, and I have the right to refuse service to anyone I choose. Alicia's lips pressed into a thin line, her phone capturing every word. Actually, no, you don't. You operate a public business, which means you're subject to anti-discrimination laws. Spare me the lecture, Timothy snapped. People like you are always looking for a fight, always trying to twist things to make it about yourselves. The room seemed to hold its breath. Alicia stepped closer, her phone still raised, her voice unwavering. And people like you think you can hide your racism behind your so-called policies. But the law is very clear. Discrimination is illegal, and there will be consequences for this. Timothy sneered, his voice dropping to a hiss. Consequences? You don't scare me. People like me built this country. You should be grateful we even let you through the door. A sharp gasp came from the back of the room, where Margaret had emerged, her face pale as she watched the scene unfold. She stepped forward as if to intervene, but froze when Timothy shot her a warning glare. I think you've said enough, Alicia said, her voice calm but cutting. You've made it clear what kind of person you are, and now everyone here knows it too. At that moment, the sound of a police siren wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder by the second. Timothy's smirk returned as he folded his arms. Looks like your little stunt's about to backfire, he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Alicia didn't flinch. We'll see about that, she replied. The patrons exchanged uneasy glances as the tension reached a breaking point. A couple near the window quickly paid their bill and left, unwilling to stick around for what was about to happen. The restaurant doors swung open, and a police officer stepped inside, their eyes scanning the scene. Alicia turned to face them, her phone still recording. Good afternoon, officer, she said evenly. I'd like to file a formal complaint about racial discrimination and harassment. Timothy's face contorted with disbelief. You've got to be kidding me, he sputtered, but his voice faltered as the officer's gaze turned toward him, eyebrows raised in silent question. Alicia held her ground, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. The confrontation just started, and now the real battle was about to begin. The police officer's presence did little to soften the tension that hung over Carter's steakhouse. The diners, previously whispering in hushed tones, now sat silent, watching the unfolding scene with wide eyes. Timothy stood tall by the podium, his red MAGA hat seemingly brighter under the chandelier light. Alicia, poised and unyielding, kept her phone steadily recording, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Timothy's boiling anger. The officer glanced between them, his expression professional but tinged with unease. What's going on here? He asked, his voice cutting through the thick silence. I called you, Timothy said immediately, stepping forward and pointing at Alicia. This woman is causing a scene, disrupting my business, and refusing to leave after I told her we're full. Alicia let out a sharp breath, raising her phone slightly. Officer, that's not what happened. I came here to have a meal. He refused to seat me. Even though the dining room is clearly not full, she gestured toward the empty tables in plain view. When I asked for an explanation, he made it clear his decision was based on my race. That's a damn lie. Timothy spat, his voice rising. He jabbed a finger toward Alicia. She's twisting my words. She walked in here looking for trouble, and now she's trying to play the victim. The officer held up a hand, his tone firm. All right, both of you, calm down. Ma'am, do you have any evidence to support your claim? I do. Alicia's voice was steady as she turned her phone toward the officer. I've been recording the interaction since he first refused me service. He explicitly stated, I don't fit in here, and told me to try somewhere more casual. Everything is on video. Timothy's face reddened further, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for a rebuttal. This is ridiculous, he finally managed, turning toward the patrons. You all saw her come in here and start causing problems. The room was silent for a moment before an older man at a corner table cleared his throat. Actually, he began hesitantly, his voice trembling slightly. All I saw was her walking in and asking for a table. She wasn't causing any trouble. Timothy's head whipped toward the man, his eyes blazing. Mind your own business. That's enough, the officer snapped, his voice cutting through Timothy's outburst. He turned to the man. Sir, you're saying you didn't see this woman being disruptive? The man nodded. That's correct. She was polite the entire time. Timothy's wife, Margaret, stepped out from the back office, her face pale and drawn. Tim, she said softly, placing a hand on his arm, maybe we should just let this go. Let it go, Timothy barked, shaking her off. You think I'm going to back down now? She's trying to ruin my business. She just wanted to eat, Margaret replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Alicia seized the moment. Officer, I'd also like it noted that he called you under false pretenses, she said firmly. He claimed I was being disruptive and aggressive, yet there's no evidence to support that. The officer nodded, his pen scratching against a notepad as he jotted down her words. Understood, ma'am. I'll include that in my report. He turned to Timothy. Sir, do you have anything else to add? Timothy sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Yeah, I've got something to add. This is my restaurant, and I'll run it how I see fit. If I don't want to serve her, that's my right. The officer raised an eyebrow. Actually, it's not. If you're refusing service based on race, that's a violation of state and federal anti-discrimination laws. Timothy's face flushed an even deeper red. I didn't refuse her because of her race, he shouted. I told her we're full, and that's the end of it. The officer gestured to the empty tables. It doesn't look full to me. A soft murmur rippled through the room. Several patrons exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort growing. A younger woman at a nearby table stood up suddenly, her cheeks flushed. I've been coming here for years, she said, her voice trembling with anger. I'm ashamed to say that now. Sit down, Timothy barked, his voice cracking. No, she shot back, her voice gaining strength. You think you can treat people like this and get away with it? Not anymore. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, glaring at Timothy as she passed. Alicia glanced at the officer, her voice calm but resolute. I'd like to file a formal complaint, and I'll also be pursuing legal action. This isn't just about me. It's about holding people like him accountable. The officer nodded, handing her a card. Here's my contact information. You can follow up with me, and I'll include everything in my report. Timothy glared at Alicia, his fists clenched. You're going to regret this, he hissed. Alicia turned to face him fully, her voice sharp and unyielding. No, you are. As she walked toward the door, the restaurant seemed to exhale collectively. Some patrons avoided her gaze, while others nodded subtly in solidarity. Outside, Alicia stood by the patrol car, her phone still in hand as the officer took her statement. Timothy watched from the window, his face a mask of rage, as Margaret stood silently behind him, her expression unreadable. The seeds of justice were firmly planted, but the fight was far from over. Alicia finished giving her statement to the officer outside the restaurant. The late afternoon sun bathed the street in a golden glow, but the tension from Carter's steakhouse followed her out like a dark cloud. She tucked the officer's card into her purse and thanked him, her calm demeanor never wavering. As she turned to leave, the restaurant door slammed open behind her, making her flinch. Timothy stormed out, his face beet red beneath his glaring red MAGA hat. His movements were erratic, his anger boiling over. You think you can just walk away from this? Timothy barked, his voice loud enough to turn heads from passers-by. You think you can waltz in here, disrespect me in my own restaurant, and get away with it? Alicia stopped mid-step, turning slowly to face him. Her posture was composed, but her heart pounded. She had seen anger like this before, uncontrolled, blinding, and dangerous. Sir, I've said everything I needed to, Alicia replied, her voice firm but measured. I suggest you do the same before you make this situation worse for yourself. Worse for me? Timothy spat, stepping closer, his towering frame looming over her. His voice dropped to a threatening growl. You don't scare me, lady. I don't care about your videos, your complaints, or your so-called rights. People like you think you can bully people like me. But let me tell you something. You're in my town now. You don't belong here." The officer, still standing nearby, cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, I suggest you calm down. This isn't helping your case." Timothy ignored him, his eyes locked on Alicia. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Walking in all high and mighty, looking down on us like we're nothing. You don't know who you're messing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Alicia shot back, her tone unflinching. "A man who hides behind his privilege and his ignorance because he's too small to face the truth." The words hit like a slap, and Timothy's hand twitched as though he wanted to reach for her. The officer immediately stepped between them, his voice firm. "That's enough. Back off, Mr. Carter." Timothy pointed a shaking finger at Alicia, his voice shaking with rage. "You'd better watch yourself. People like you always push too far, and one day you'll get what's coming to you." A small crowd began to gather, curious bystanders drawn by the commotion. Alicia noticed the mix of disgusted and shocked faces, but she kept her eyes on Timothy. "Is that a threat?" she asked, her voice as sharp as a blade. Timothy hesitated, realizing he had spoken too loudly. "It's a fact," he sneered, taking a step back but still glaring. "People like you think you're untouchable. Well, let's see how untouchable you are when this town turns its back on you." The officer moved closer to Timothy, his voice sterner now. "That's enough, Mr. Carter. I'm warning you. Any further aggression, and I'll have to take action." Timothy laughed bitterly, throwing his hands in the air. "Oh, of course. You're taking her side, too. This is what's wrong with this country. Catering to people like her while hard-working folks like me get trampled on." The crowd murmured louder now, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A young woman in workout clothes pulled out her phone, aiming it at Timothy. "Unbelievable," she muttered, her camera catching his every move. "You're digging your own grave," Alicia said calmly, her voice cutting through his rant. "And now, everyone here sees exactly who you are. You can't hide behind your restaurant, your money, or your slogans anymore." Timothy's fists clenched at his sides, his face twisting with impotent rage. The officer stepped closer, his hand resting on his belt. "Mr. Carter, this is your final warning. Leave now, or I'll have to detain you." Timothy sneered at the officer, but finally stepped back, his chest heaving with unspent anger. He jabbed a finger at Alicia one last time. "This isn't over," he growled, before storming back into the restaurant, slamming the door behind him. The tension in the air seemed to ease as the door closed, and the small crowd began to disperse. The young woman with the phone approached Alicia, her expression apologetic. "I got that whole thing," she said. "If you need another video for your case, I'll send it to you." "Thank you," Alicia said, giving the woman a small smile. She took a deep breath, her heart still pounding. The officer turned to Alicia, his face softer now. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," Alicia replied, her voice steady again. "I've dealt with people like him before, but this time I'm going to make sure he faces the consequences." The officer nodded, his tone professional once more. "If you need to add anything to your complaint, just contact me. And be careful. He seems unstable." Alicia nodded. "Thank you, officer." As she walked away, the weight of the confrontation settled over her, but she felt no fear, only determination. Timothy's threats and outbursts had only strengthened her resolve. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up to people like him and ensuring justice was served. The next morning, Alicia sat in the quiet of Rachel Collins's office, sunlight streaming through tall windows onto a desk cluttered with legal textbooks and case files. Rachel, a sharp-eyed attorney known for taking on discrimination cases, leaned forward as she scrolled through the video on Alicia's phone. Timothy's angry, red-faced tirade echoed through the small office, his words impossible to misinterpret. "This is as clear-cut as it gets," Rachel said, pausing the video. "Blatant racial discrimination, verbal harassment, and a clear threat. He's left us everything we need to make this case airtight." Alicia crossed her arms, her expression unwavering. "I don't just want damages. I want to make sure he can't treat anyone else like this again. Rachel nodded, jotting notes on a legal pad. We'll start with the State Human Rights Commission. That will force an official investigation and get his business under scrutiny immediately. Once that's in motion, we'll prepare a civil lawsuit. If he has any sense, he'll settle. But I doubt someone like him will take that route. He won't, Alicia said, her voice firm. He's too arrogant. But I'm ready to fight. Rachel set her pen down and folded her hands together. We'll also be asking for punitive damages. This isn't just about compensating you. It's about making sure he feels the consequences of his actions and sending a message to others like him. Good, Alicia replied. He's been getting away with this for far too long. Rachel tilted her head, studying Alicia closely. This isn't going to be easy. People like Timothy Carter thrive on playing the victim, especially when their behavior is exposed. Are you prepared for the attention this will bring? Alicia met her gaze steadily. I've dealt with worse. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about standing up for everyone who's ever been treated like they didn't belong. I won't back down. Rachel smiled faintly, sliding a document across the desk. Let's get started. Back at Carter's steakhouse, Timothy sat in his office, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. The once proud restaurant felt like a prison now, its polished walls and luxurious decor unable to shield him from the growing storm outside. His laptop screen glowed with venomous comments, his business's reputation crumbling with every refresh. Racist establishment, one review read. The owner refuses service based on skin color. Boycott this place. Shut this place down, demanded another. The restaurant's phone rang endlessly, the sharp sound only adding to Timothy's boiling frustration. Each call was a complaint, a cancellation, or worse, a direct confrontation. His fists clenched as he slammed the laptop shut, muttering curses under his breath. Margaret stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face lined with exhaustion. Tim, this isn't going away. People are canceling reservations, and the staff is starting to ask if we'll even make payroll next month. Timothy turned to her, his face flushed with anger. You think I'm going to apologize? That I'm going to grovel to her and admit I did something wrong? Margaret took a step inside, her voice soft but firm. I think you need to start thinking about what's best for this business. For us, you don't have to admit anything. Just make a statement. Say something neutral. Anything to calm people down. I'm not apologizing, Timothy snapped, his voice rising. She came in here looking for trouble, and now she's trying to ruin us. This is all on her. Margaret's lips tightened, but she didn't back down. Maybe you need to take a good look at yourself, Tim. You didn't have to humiliate her like that. You could have just treated her like any other customer. But you didn't, and now we're paying the price. I treated her exactly how she deserved to be treated, Timothy growled, slamming his fist on the desk. This is my restaurant, and no one tells me how to run it. Margaret shook her head slowly, her voice quieter now. You're too proud to see what's happening. You're digging our grave, Tim. Timothy turned back to the window, glaring at the protesters gathering outside. Their signs read, "Racism has no place here," and "Justice for Alicia." Their chants echoed faintly through the thick glass, growing louder with every passing moment. Let them protest, Timothy muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. They'll get bored and move on. They always do. But deep down, Margaret knew better. She could see the writing on the wall, even if Timothy refused to. That evening, Alicia sat on her couch, her laptop open as messages poured into her inbox. The video had reached far beyond her social media, shared by local news outlets, activists, and even national platforms. The comments, though overwhelming, fueled her determination. "Thank you for standing up," one person wrote. "We need more people like you to fight back against this kind of hatred." "I'm so sorry you went through this," said another. "Stay strong. You're making a difference." Alicia scrolled through the messages, her resolve solidifying with every word. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a fight for every person who had ever been silenced, humiliated, or told they didn't belong. She closed her laptop and leaned back, her mind racing with the road ahead. Timothy Carter thought he could intimidate her, silence her, and walk away unscathed. But he was about to learn exactly what it meant to face the consequences of his actions. The protests outside Carter's steakhouse swelled with each passing day. What began as a handful of demonstrators had grown into a crowd that spilled onto the nearby sidewalks, their chants audible from blocks away. Signs painted with bold letters declared, "Racism ends here," and "Justice for Alicia," waving high above the heads of locals, activists, and curious onlookers who had gathered to see the commotion. Timothy stood at the window of his office, his jaw clenched as he watched the growing crowd. His restaurant's once pristine reputation was now in ruins. The lunch rush had dwindled to a trickle of die-hard loyalists, but even they looked over their shoulders nervously, wary of being associated with him. "Tim, you can't ignore this anymore." Margaret's voice broke the tense silence, her tone a mix of urgency and exhaustion. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "This isn't just bad PR. It's a disaster. We're hemorrhaging money." Timothy didn't turn away from the window. His fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the windowsill as he muttered, "I'm not giving in to them." "You're not giving in?" Margaret snapped, her voice rising. "You're not giving in, but you're also not doing anything." The phone won't stop ringing with complaints. The staff is panicking, and half our suppliers are threatening to cut ties. Timothy finally turned to face her, his expression hard. "So, what do you want me to do, Margaret? Crawl to that woman and beg her forgiveness? Admit I did something wrong when I didn't?" Margaret threw her hands up in frustration. "I want you to save what's left of this business before there's nothing left to save." Timothy's sneer deepened. "They'll get bored," he said, gesturing toward the protesters outside. "They always do. The media will find another story, and this will blow over." "Look outside," Margaret shot back, pointing toward the window. "Does that look like it's blowing over to you?" Timothy didn't answer. He turned back to the window, his fists tightening as he stared at the crowd. Alicia stood among the protesters, her phone in hand as she recorded the scene. The energy of the crowd buoyed her, their chants and raised voices a stark contrast to the isolation she had felt during her confrontation with Timothy. Now, she wasn't alone. She spotted Angela Martin, a local journalist, weaving through the crowd with a microphone in hand. Angela caught sight of Alicia and waved her over. "Alicia Brown?" she asked, her voice warm but professional. "That's me," Alicia replied, her voice steady. Angela gestured to her camera crew, who quickly adjusted their equipment. "Would you mind giving us a statement? Your story has captured a lot of attention, and people want to hear directly from you." Alicia hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She stepped into the frame, the chants of the protesters a steady backdrop. Angela raised her microphone. "Alicia, your video of the incident at Carter's Steakhouse has gone viral, sparking protests and widespread backlash against the restaurant. Can you tell us why you decided to take a stand?" Alicia's voice was calm but resolute. "I took a stand because what happened to me wasn't just wrong. It was illegal. No one should be treated differently because of their race, especially in a place that claims to welcome the public. This fight isn't just about me. It's about holding people accountable and making sure that no one else has to go through what I did." Angela nodded, her expression thoughtful. "What do you hope to achieve with this fight?" "I want accountability," Alicia replied firmly. "Not just from Timothy Carter, but from everyone who enables this kind of behavior. And I want people to know that they have the right to stand up against discrimination, no matter where it happens." Angela smiled faintly, lowering her microphone. "Thank you, Alicia. Your courage is inspiring to a lot of people." As the interview wrapped up, Alicia felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see a young woman holding a sign that read, "Your fight is our fight." The woman's face was flushed, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Thank you for doing this," the woman said. "My mom went through something similar a few years ago, but she didn't have the strength to fight back. Seeing you stand up, it means a lot." Alicia smiled, her chest tightening with emotion. "Thank you," she said softly. It means a lot to hear that. The woman nodded and stepped back into the crowd, her sign held high. Alicia turned back to the restaurant, her gaze steady as she spotted Timothy's silhouette in the window. He was watching, but this time she didn't feel the weight of his anger. She felt her own strength, and the strength of everyone standing with her. That evening, Timothy sat alone in his office, the chants of the protesters still faintly audible through the walls. His hands trembled as he reached for his laptop and reopened the restaurant's social media page. The reviews and comments were relentless, a torrent of anger and disgust. "You're done, Carter," one comment read. "This isn't the 1960s. We don't tolerate this anymore. Apologize and step down," said another. "It's the only way to save yourself now." Timothy slammed the laptop shut, his chest heaving. He didn't know how much more he could take, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. As the crowd outside continued to chant, Timothy's world grew smaller and smaller, the walls closing in around him. By the fifth day, the protests outside Carter's steakhouse had reached a fever pitch. The crowd spilled into the street, their chants loud enough to drown out the sounds of passing cars. Signs bearing slogans like "Racism ends here" and "Justice for Alicia" waved above the heads of an increasingly energized group of demonstrators. News crews lined the sidewalks, capturing every moment as the standoff between Timothy Carter and the community unfolded. Inside the restaurant, Timothy's patience finally snapped. He couldn't take the silence of the empty dining room, the calls from angry former customers, or the relentless chants that echoed through the walls. The protesters had taken everything from him, his business, his reputation, his control. And now they were outside mocking him. "Enough!" Timothy growled, slamming his fist against the podium. Without a second thought, he stormed toward the front door, Margaret trailing behind him. "Tim, don't!" she called, her voice tinged with panic. "This isn't going to help." He ignored her, shoving the door open with such force that it banged against the brick wall outside. The crowd turned at the noise, their chants fading for a moment as they spotted him. His red MAGA hat gleamed in the fading sunlight, a beacon of defiance and rage. "You think this is funny?" Timothy roared, stepping forward. His voice cracked as he pointed an accusing finger at the protesters. "You think you can just stand out here, waving your signs, and destroy me? You're nothing but a bunch of freeloaders with too much time on your hands." The crowd erupted, their chants swelling again. "Shut it down! Shut it down!" they shouted in unison. Timothy's face reddened further. He stomped toward the nearest protester, a young man holding a sign that read, "Justice for Alicia." "You think you're a hero, huh?" Timothy snarled. "You don't know anything about me, about my business. You're just following the mob." The young man didn't back down, holding his phone steady as he recorded Timothy's tirade. "The whole world knows what you are," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "Oh, shut up!" Timothy snapped, his hand jerking forward as though he wanted to grab the phone. The young man flinched but didn't move, his eyes locked on Timothy's face. "Get back!" another protester shouted, stepping between Timothy and the young man. She was a middle-aged woman, her face set with determination. "You can't intimidate us." "I'm not trying to intimidate you," Timothy bellowed, his voice shaking. "I'm trying to save my business, my livelihood. But you people don't care about that. You just want to destroy everything I've worked for." "Destroying?" the woman shot back. "You're the one who humiliated a black woman in front of your entire restaurant. You're the one who made this mess." The crowd cheered in agreement, their chants rising once more. "Shut it down! Shut it down!" Timothy turned in a circle, his arms raised as if to quiet them. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice cracking. "She came in here looking for trouble. She wanted this to happen. She wanted you to refuse her service?" the young man said incredulously, still holding his phone. "She wanted you to insult her, threaten her, and call the cops on her? That's what you think?" "You don't know what it's like," Timothy roared. "You don't know what it's like to work hard your whole life, to build something from nothing, only to have it torn apart by people who don't belong here." The crowd gasped, his words cutting through the air like a knife. A hush fell over the protesters for a moment, the weight of his statement sinking in. "Don't belong here?" someone shouted from the back of the crowd. "What the hell does that mean?" Another voice called out. Timothy realized his mistake too late. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The crowd surged forward, their voices growing louder, angrier. "Racist!" someone shouted. "Apologize!" yelled another. Timothy backed up a step, his bravado faltering. "You don't understand," he said again, his voice cracking with desperation. "I didn't mean apologize," the crowd chanted. "Apologize! Apologize!" Margaret stepped out of the restaurant, grabbing Timothy's arm. "Tim, stop!" she hissed. "You're making it worse." Timothy yanked his arm away, turning to glare at her. "I'm not apologizing to these people," he snapped. "I didn't do anything wrong." The police officers stationed nearby stepped forward, their hands hovering near their belts. One of them raised a hand, trying to calm the crowd. "Everyone, let's keep this peaceful," he said, his voice carrying over the noise. The protesters pulled back slightly, their chants continuing but losing some of their intensity. Timothy, his chest heaving, glared at the crowd one last time before storming back into the restaurant. Margaret followed, her face pale with anger and frustration. Inside, Timothy slammed the door and leaned against it, his breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. "They don't get to win," he muttered, more to himself than to Margaret. "They don't get to ruin me." Margaret stared at him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "You've already ruined yourself, Tim," she said softly. In the days leading up to the court proceedings, Rachel's office became a war room. Files and documents were spread across the large conference table, each piece of evidence meticulously reviewed and catalogued. Alicia sat at the far end, her laptop open as she rewatched the videos for what felt like the 100th time. Every word Timothy had shouted, every venomous phrase, and every sneer was ingrained in her memory. Rachel paced the room, flipping through a legal pad as she outlined their strategy. "The videos are our strongest weapon," she said, glancing at Alicia. "They capture everything. His refusal to serve you, his verbal abuse, and even his threats. The Human Rights Commission will weigh that heavily." Alicia nodded, her jaw tight. "What about his finances? You mentioned we subpoenaed his records." Rachel smirked. "We did, and they paint a pretty grim picture for him. The restaurant has been in decline for years. This lawsuit could be the final nail in the coffin, especially with the bad press and the protesters." "Good," Alicia said firmly. "He needs to feel the full weight of this." Rachel stopped pacing and leaned on the table. "We're also bringing in former employees to testify. Several of them have come forward with stories about Timothy's discriminatory behavior, refusing to hire minorities, using racial slurs in the kitchen, and creating a hostile work environment. Their testimonies will show that this isn't just about one incident. It's a pattern." Alicia's eyes narrowed. "Do you think he'll try to settle before this goes to court?" Rachel tilted her head thoughtfully. "He might, but knowing him, I doubt it. Men like Timothy thrive on their pride. They'd rather burn everything to the ground than admit they were wrong." "Then we'll be ready," Alicia said. Across town, Timothy sat in his office, glaring at his attorney. The man was younger, clean-cut, and visibly uncomfortable under Timothy's intense stare. "So, what are my options?" Timothy demanded, his voice sharp. The attorney cleared his throat, glancing down at his notes. "Mr. Carter, the evidence against you is overwhelming. The videos alone are damning, not to mention the witnesses who have come forward. I strongly recommend you settle this case before it goes to trial." Timothy slammed his fist on the desk, making the attorney jump. "Settle? Are you kidding me? That would be admitting I did something wrong." "Mr. Carter, with all due respect, you did do something wrong," the attorney replied cautiously. "You refused service to a customer based on her race. That's illegal. If this goes to trial, you'll lose, and the damages could bankrupt you." Timothy leaned back in his chair, his face flushed with anger. "I don't care about the money," he growled. "This is about my reputation. If I settle, everyone will think I'm a coward. Right now, your reputation is already in tatters," the attorney said bluntly. "You've become a national example of discrimination. Settling could help you save face and minimize the damage." Timothy's eyes burned with defiance. "No, I'm not backing down. Let her come after me. Let them all come after me. I'm not admitting to anything." The attorney sighed, gathering his notes. "Then I'll prepare for trial. But you need to understand, the odds are not in your favor." "Just do your job," Timothy snapped. Back in Rachel's office, Alicia met with two former employees of Carter's Steakhouse, both young men in their 20s. They sat across from her at the table, nervously sipping water as they recounted their experiences working under Timothy. "He always treated us differently," one of them said, his voice low. "He never said anything outright, but you could feel it, like we weren't good enough to work there. He didn't even try to hide it with me," the other added. "He called me lazy more times than I can count. And when I asked for a raise, he laughed in my face. Said I should be grateful he even hired me." Rachel took notes as they spoke, nodding occasionally. "Your testimonies will be critical," she said. "We'll need you to be clear and concise about your experiences. The goal is to establish a pattern of discriminatory behavior." The first man hesitated. "Do you think he'll come after us for this? I mean, he's got money." And Rachel shook her head firmly. "You're protected under whistleblower laws. He can't retaliate against you for coming forward. And after this case, I doubt he'll have the resources to do anything." Alicia offered a reassuring smile. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "This isn't just about me. It's about standing up for everyone he's ever mistreated." The young men exchanged glances, then nodded. As the preparations continued, Alicia felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. Every day brought a new piece of evidence, a new angle to consider, a new wave of support from people who had seen her story online. She read their messages late into the night, their words fueling her resolve. "You're fighting for all of us," one message read. "Don't give up. We're behind you," said another. Sitting alone in her apartment, Alicia glanced at the folder of court documents on her coffee table. The fight had already taken so much out of her, but giving up was never an option. Timothy Carter thought he could intimidate her into silence, but he was about to learn the power of persistence and truth. The courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation as people filed in, taking their seats on the wooden benches. Reporters lined the back row, their notepads and cameras ready to capture every detail. The case of Brown v. Carter had become a lightning rod for public debate, a microcosm of a nation's struggle with race and accountability. Alicia sat at the plaintiff's table, her back straight and her face composed. Rachel Collins sat beside her, shuffling through papers with calm precision. Across the room, Timothy Carter slouched in his chair, his jaw tight. His lawyer, a young man with a neatly pressed suit, whispered something to him, but Timothy waved him off, his glare fixed on Alicia. "All rise," the bailiff called, his voice ringing through the room. The judge, an older man with a stern face and a commanding presence, entered and took his seat. "You may be seated," he said, his voice measured. Rachel stood first, her heels clicking softly against the floor as she approached the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone clear and deliberate, "this case is about accountability. It's about standing up to discrimination and holding those in power responsible for their actions." She gestured toward Alicia. "My client, Alicia Brown, walked into Carter's Steakhouse on an ordinary day, expecting to be treated like any other customer. Instead, she was met with hostility, humiliation, and outright discrimination. Mr. Carter refused to serve her, not because of her behavior or any legitimate reason, but because of the color of her skin." Rachel paused, letting her words hang in the air. This wasn't just an isolated incident. This was a violation of the law, and a violation of basic human decency. And today, we're here to ensure that justice is served. As she returned to her seat, Timothy's lawyer stood, buttoning his suit jacket as he approached the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone measured but defensive. "My client, Timothy Carter, is a small business owner who has dedicated his life to building a successful restaurant. He's a hard-working man who made a judgment call, one that's been unfairly twisted into something it's not." He gestured toward Alicia. "Ms. Brown is claiming discrimination. But let's not forget, my client has the right to refuse service to anyone for any reason. This case is nothing more than an attempt to destroy a man's livelihood over a misunderstanding." Alicia's hands tightened in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. Timothy's lawyer returned to his seat, casting a smug glance in her direction. The first witness was called to the stand, a former employee of Carter's Steakhouse. The young man fidgeted nervously, his hands clasped tightly as he faced the courtroom. "Please state your name for the record," Rachel said, her voice calm and reassuring. "Darren Williams," the young man replied, his voice trembling slightly. "Darren, can you tell the court about your experience working for Mr. Carter?" Darren swallowed hard before answering. "I worked at Carter's Steakhouse for about a year. During that time, I saw Mr. Carter treat certain employees and customers differently because of their race." Timothy shifted in his seat, his face darkening as he muttered something to his lawyer. Rachel nodded. "Can you give us an example?" "There was a time when a black couple came in for dinner," Darren began, his voice growing steadier. "Mr. Carter told me to seat them somewhere out of sight. He said they weren't the kind of customers he wanted his regulars to see." The courtroom murmured softly, the jury exchanging glances. Timothy's lawyer stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Overruled. The witness is recounting a direct instruction from the defendant." Rachel continued. "Darren, did you ever hear Mr. Carter use racially charged language?" Darren hesitated, glancing nervously at Timothy before nodding. "Yes, he called me lazy once and said I was lucky to have a job. And he used slurs in the kitchen when he thought no one could hear." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the courtroom. Alicia's jaw tightened, but she kept her gaze fixed on Darren, willing him to continue. "Thank you, Darren," Rachel said, her voice steady. "No further questions." Timothy's lawyer approached the stand, his tone sharp. "Darren, you said you worked at Carter's Steakhouse for a year. Why didn't you quit if you were so unhappy?" Darren shifted uncomfortably. "I needed the job. It was hard to find work." "Or maybe," the lawyer said, leaning closer, "you're exaggerating because you've got a grudge against my client. Isn't it true that you were fired for being late?" Darren flushed, his voice rising. "I was late once, and I apologized." "Once?" the lawyer interrupted. "Or multiple times?" Rachel stood quickly. "Objection. Badgering the witness." "Sustained," the judge said. Timothy's lawyer smirked but stepped back. No further questions. As Darren stepped down, Rachel called Alicia to the stand. The room fell silent as she walked forward, her movements deliberate and confident. Once sworn in, Rachel began her questioning. "Alicia, can you describe what happened when you walked into Carter's Steakhouse that day?" Alicia recounted the events in vivid detail. The cold reception, Timothy's refusal to seat her, and his venomous words. Her voice was steady, but the emotion in her words was unmistakable. "He said I didn't belong there," she concluded, her voice firm. "Not because of anything I did, but because of who I am." The courtroom was silent as Alicia's words settled over the room, her voice steady, despite the emotional weight of her testimony. She sat upright in the witness chair, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm but resolute. The jury's eyes were fixed on her, some leaning forward as if trying to catch every detail of her story. Rachel stepped closer to the witness stand, her tone gentle yet firm. "Alicia, when Mr. Carter told you that you didn't belong there, how did that make you feel?" Alicia hesitated, her eyes flickering to the jury before settling back on Rachel. "It was humiliating," she said, her voice clear but tinged with emotion. "I felt small, like I didn't matter, like I wasn't worthy of being treated with basic respect. It wasn't just about being denied a seat. It was about being told in no uncertain terms that I wasn't good enough to exist in that space. Rachel nodded, allowing a moment for Alicia's words to sink in. "And how did you respond?" "I stood my ground," Alicia replied. "I told him he was violating my rights, and I recorded the interaction because I knew no one would believe me otherwise. But inside, I was angry and hurt. I've faced discrimination before, but this was different. It was so blatant, so unapologetic." Rachel turned toward the jury, her voice growing more forceful. Alicia recorded the interaction because she knew it would be her word against his. And she was right. Without that recording, Mr. Carter would have been free to deny what he said, to twist the narrative. But the evidence speaks for itself. Rachel paused, letting her words resonate before continuing. "Alicia, why did you decide to pursue legal action against Mr. Carter?" Alicia's gaze didn't waver. "Because this isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been made to feel less than, who's ever been told they don't belong because of the color of their skin. If I don't stand up to people like him, who will?" The silence in the courtroom was broken only by the faint scratching of pens as reporters jotted down her words. Rachel nodded, her expression one of quiet pride. "Thank you, Alicia. No further questions." As Rachel returned to her seat, Timothy's lawyer stood, buttoning his jacket as he approached the witness stand. "Ms. Brown," he began, his tone sharp and calculating, "you've painted my client as some kind of villain. But isn't it true that you could have left quietly that day, instead of escalating the situation?" Alicia raised an eyebrow, her posture unchanging. "I could have left," she admitted. "But why should I have to? Why should I be forced to leave a public establishment because the owner decided I wasn't good enough to be there?" Timothy's lawyer smirked, pacing in front of the jury. "So, you stayed to prove a point?" "I stayed because I have a right to exist in the same spaces as anyone else," Alicia replied firmly. The lawyer turned, his expression hardening. "And isn't it true that you were recording the interaction to provoke a reaction from my client?" "I recorded the interaction to protect myself," Alicia shot back, "because I knew there would be people like you who would try to twist the truth." The lawyer's smirk faltered for a moment before he pressed on. "You claim that my client's words hurt you deeply. But isn't it also true that you've used this situation to gain attention for yourself? Your video has gone viral, after all." Alicia's expression didn't change. "I didn't ask for any of this. I would have preferred to have my meal in peace, like anyone else. The attention this has brought wasn't my goal, but if it helps shine a light on discrimination, then so be it." The lawyer narrowed his eyes, his voice growing sharper. "You've painted yourself as a victim. But isn't it possible that my client simply made a mistake? That his refusal to serve you had nothing to do with your race?" Alicia leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but cutting. "A mistake? He told me I didn't belong there. He told me to try somewhere more casual. And when I refused to leave, he called the police and threatened me. Does that sound like a mistake to you?" The lawyer faltered, his face tightening as he glanced toward Timothy, who sat rigidly at the defense table. The courtroom was silent, all eyes on Alicia, as her words hung in the air. "No further questions," the lawyer said finally, his voice stiff. As Alicia stepped down from the witness stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The jurors exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful. The weight of her testimony lingered, her words painting a vivid picture of the humiliation and injustice she had endured. Rachel gave Alicia a reassuring nod as she returned to her seat, but Alicia barely noticed. Her heart was pounding, her hands slightly trembling as she folded them in her lap. She had spoken her truth, and now it was up to the jury to decide if justice would be served. Across the room, Timothy's face was a mask of anger and frustration. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering furiously, but his words were drowned out by the quiet murmurs of the crowd. For the first time, it was clear that his confidence was cracking, the realization of his vulnerability sinking in. The trial was far from over, but Alicia could feel the tide beginning to turn. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier as the trial moved into its second day. Timothy Carter sat at the defendant's table, his shoulders stiff and his face contorted with frustration. His lawyer, looking equally tense, shuffled through notes and whispered hurried advice. Across the room, Alicia sat with Rachel, her posture composed but her eyes reflecting the strain of the proceedings. Rachel stood, her presence commanding as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, we'd like to call our next witness, Angela Martin." Angela, a seasoned journalist and one of the first reporters to cover Alicia's story, approached the stand with calm confidence. After being sworn in, she adjusted the microphone and met Rachel's gaze. "Ms. Martin," Rachel began, her tone steady, "you were present at the protests outside Carter's steakhouse. Can you describe what you observed?" Angela nodded. "I was there as a reporter, covering the growing backlash to Mr. Carter's actions. The crowd was peaceful, diverse, and passionate. They were there to stand against discrimination and demand accountability." "And what happened when Mr. Carter confronted the protesters?" Rachel asked, her voice gaining an edge. Angela's expression tightened. "He came out of the restaurant shouting, clearly agitated. He accused the protesters of trying to destroy his business and shouted phrases like, 'People like you don't belong here.' His words were inflammatory and escalated the situation." Rachel turned to the jury, her voice deliberate. "Did Mr. Carter attempt to de-escalate the situation in any way?" Angela shook her head. "No, quite the opposite. His behavior only fueled the tension. It was clear he wasn't interested in dialogue, only in asserting his authority." Timothy's lawyer stood quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. Speculation." "Sustained," the judge replied. "Ms. Martin, please stick to what you observed." Rachel nodded and continued. "Ms. Martin, did you record Mr. Carter's actions during the protest?" "Yes, I did," Angela replied, her voice firm. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this video as evidence," Rachel said, holding up a flash drive. The judge nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom's lights dimmed slightly as the video played on a large screen. Timothy's voice boomed from the speakers, his face twisted with anger as he shouted at the protesters. His words, "You people don't belong here," echoed through the room, drawing sharp intakes of breath from the jury and spectators alike. Rachel paused the video and turned back to Angela. "Is this an accurate representation of what you witnessed that day?" "It is," Angela said firmly. "No further questions," Rachel said, returning to her seat. Timothy's lawyer stood, his jaw tight as he approached the witness stand. "Ms. Martin, as a journalist, wouldn't you agree that it's your job to present stories in a way that garners attention?" Angela's lips tightened. "It's my job to report the truth." "Isn't it true," the lawyer pressed, "that the protest was already tense before my client came outside? That the crowd was loud, disruptive, and aggressive?" "The crowd was passionate," Angela countered. "But they were peaceful until Mr. Carter escalated the situation." The lawyer's tone sharpened. "And isn't it possible that the video you provided was edited to cast my client in the worst possible light?" Angela didn't flinch. "The video is unedited. What you saw is exactly what happened." The lawyer's mouth tightened, but he nodded curtly. "No further questions." Angela stepped down, her expression calm as she returned to her seat. Rachel rose again, her voice steady as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, we'd like to call our final witness, Darren Williams." Darren, the former employee who had testified earlier, walked to the stand with a mix of nervousness and determination. Once sworn in, he clasped his hands tightly and faced Rachel. "Darren," Rachel began, "you testified earlier about your experience working under Mr. Carter. Can you elaborate on how he treated employees of color?" Darren took a deep breath. "He treated us like we didn't belong there. He called us lazy, made us do the hardest jobs, and criticized us for things he ignored in other employees." Rachel nodded. "Did Mr. Carter ever use racially charged language?" "Yes," Darren said quietly. "He used slurs when he thought no one could hear. And he joked about how certain people shouldn't be working in a place like this." The courtroom murmured, the weight of Darren's words settling over the room. Rachel stepped closer. "Darren, why are you testifying today?" Because I'm tired of staying quiet, Darren said, his voice growing stronger. People like him think they can get away with this forever. But they can't. It's wrong. And it has to stop. Rachel nodded, her expression solemn. Thank you, Darren. No further questions. Timothy's lawyer rose again, his tone sharp. Mr. Williams, you've already testified that you were fired for being late multiple times. Isn't it possible that your testimony today is motivated by a personal grudge? Darren met his gaze evenly. I'm not here because I'm bitter. I'm here because what he did was wrong. Isn't it true, the lawyer continued, that you've never filed a formal complaint against my client before this trial? Darren nodded. It's true. I didn't speak up then. But I'm speaking up now. The lawyer smirked slightly. Convenient timing, don't you think? Rachel stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge said, casting a warning glance at the defense table. The lawyer stepped back. No further questions. As Darren left the stand, Alicia felt a wave of quiet pride. The testimonies were building a damning case, and the courtroom was beginning to see Timothy Carter for who he truly was. The final day of the trial brought an air of palpable tension to the courtroom. The seats were filled to capacity, and the reporters in the back row scribbled furiously in their notepads. Alicia sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands resting calmly on her lap, though the steady rhythm of her breath betrayed her nerves. Timothy sat opposite her, his shoulders hunched and his face drawn. He looked smaller than he had at the start of the trial, his confidence chipped away by days of damning testimony. The judge looked over his glasses at the courtroom. Counselors, are we ready for closing arguments? Rachel stood, smoothing her jacket as she approached the jury box. Her voice was measured but carried an unmistakable intensity. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard the testimony. You've seen the evidence. This case is about more than one incident of discrimination. It's about accountability, fairness, and the courage to stand up against injustice. She gestured toward Alicia. My client didn't ask for this fight. She walked into Carter's steakhouse expecting a meal, not a confrontation. She was polite, calm, and reasonable, but she was met with hostility, humiliation, and an attempt to strip her of her dignity, all because of the color of her skin. Rachel paced slowly, her words deliberate. Mr. Carter has tried to justify his actions as a misunderstanding, but the evidence tells a different story. The video footage, the testimonies of former employees, and Mr. Carter's own words paint a clear picture of someone who believes he can treat people differently based on race. This is not just morally wrong, it's illegal. She turned to face the jury directly, her voice softening but losing none of its conviction. Alicia Brown stood up not just for herself, but for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. Your decision today has the power to send a message that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. Rachel stepped back to her seat, her gaze steady as she returned to Alicia's side. Timothy's lawyer rose, his expression tight as he approached the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his tone defensive, we've heard a lot of accusations in this trial, but let's not lose sight of the facts. My client is a small business owner who has dedicated his life to his restaurant. He made a judgment call that day, and while it may have been misinterpreted, it was not motivated by racism. He gestured toward Timothy. Mr. Carter has faced a media firestorm, protests, and threats to his livelihood because of this incident. He is not a perfect man, but he is not a racist. This case has been blown out of proportion by people with an agenda. The lawyer paused, his tone softening. Think about the precedent this case sets. If we punish business owners for every perceived slight, where does it end? Please don't let one misunderstanding ruin a man's life. He returned to his seat, his shoulders slumping as he whispered something to Timothy, who refused to meet his gaze. The judge addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard the arguments and seen the evidence. It is now your duty to deliberate and reach a verdict. Court is adjourned until the jury has made its decision. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room, and the jury filed out. Alicia exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Rachel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You were incredible," Rachel said softly. "Now we wait." The wait felt interminable. Hours stretched on as Alicia paced the courthouse hallway, her heart pounding with every passing second. Timothy sat at the other end of the hall, glaring at the floor, his lawyer whispering in his ear. Finally, the bailiff emerged, his expression unreadable. "The jury has reached a verdict," he announced. Everyone filed back into the courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. Alicia's stomach churned as she took her seat, her hands gripping the edge of the table. The jury foreman stood, holding a piece of paper in his hands. He cleared his throat, his voice steady as he spoke. "In the matter of Brown versus Carter, we find the defendant, Timothy Carter, guilty of racial discrimination and harassment." The words rang through the courtroom like a bell. Alicia felt a surge of relief and vindication, her eyes welling with tears as Rachel gave her a firm nod. The judge continued, "The jury has also determined that punitive damages are warranted and implement mandatory anti-discrimination training at his establishment." A murmur rippled through the courtroom as Timothy slumped in his seat, his face pale and his hands trembling. Margaret, who had sat silently behind him throughout the trial, lowered her head, her expression unreadable. The judge banged his gavel. "Court is adjourned." Alicia stood, her knees slightly weak, but her spirit soaring. Supporters in the gallery clapped softly, and Rachel leaned in close. "You did it," she said quietly. "We did it." Timothy stormed out of the courtroom without a word, his lawyer trailing behind him. Alicia watched him go, the sight of his retreating figure a stark reminder of the fight she had endured. As she stepped outside, the crowd of supporters erupted into cheers. The sun was shining, and for the first time in weeks, Alicia felt the weight on her shoulders lift. She raised her hand in a small wave, the noise of the crowd washing over her like a balm. This wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for everyone who believed in justice. The courthouse steps buzzed with energy as Alicia emerged into the sunlight, the crisp air filled with cheers and chants. Supporters crowded the plaza, waving signs that read, "Justice for Alicia," and "Racism has no place here." A sea of reporters swarmed forward, their cameras and microphones jostling for position as they tried to capture the moment. Alicia paused at the top of the steps, taking a deep breath. For weeks, she had carried the weight of this case, fighting for her dignity and for a broader principle. Now, standing in the light of victory, she felt a mix of relief and determination. Rachel stood beside her, leaning in to whisper, "This is your moment, Alicia. Speak from the heart." Alicia nodded and stepped forward, raising her hand to quiet the crowd. "Today's verdict is not just a victory for me. It's a victory for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong," she began, her voice steady and clear. "It's proof that standing up to injustice, no matter how daunting it may seem, can lead to real change." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing down the city streets. Alicia glanced at the rows of supporters, many of whom had stood with her throughout the trial, holding signs and chanting for justice. "This fight was never just about me," Alicia continued, her voice growing stronger. "It's about every person who has ever been silenced, who has ever been made to feel less than, who has ever been told they don't have a place. Discrimination has no place in our communities, in our businesses, or in our country. And today, we've sent a message. That behavior will not be tolerated." Tears welled in Alicia's eyes as the crowd roared their approval. She stepped back, allowing Rachel to guide her down the steps. The crowd surged forward, supporters reaching out to shake her hand, offer hugs, and express their gratitude. A young woman approached, clutching a sign that read, "Your fight is our fight." She hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice trembling. "Thank you," she said softly. "What you did today, it gives people like me hope. My family's been through so much. Seeing you win means everything." Alicia's heart swelled with emotion. She placed a hand on the woman's shoulder and smiled warmly. "Thank you for being here," she said. "This fight isn't over, but we've taken a big step forward." The woman nodded, tears brimming in her eyes as she stepped back into the crowd. Alicia turned to Rachel, who gave her a small nod of approval. Across town, the mood inside Carter's Steakhouse was somber and oppressive. The once bustling restaurant was dark and empty, its chairs stacked neatly on tables and its polished bar untouched. Timothy Carter stood behind the counter, his hands gripping the edge of the bar as he stared at the empty dining room. The verdict had been a public humiliation, but the financial fallout was even worse. Customers had abandoned the restaurant in droves, suppliers had severed their contracts, and the bank had frozen his accounts. The business he had spent decades building was unraveling before his eyes. Margaret entered quietly, carrying a clipboard and a stack of invoices. She set them on the bar with a sigh. "The bank called again," she said, her voice tinged with weariness. "They've officially pulled the loan. And the suppliers, they're done with us. We're out of options." Timothy didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on the bar, his jaw clenched and his knuckles white. "You have to face it, Tim," Margaret continued, her tone softening. "It's over. The restaurant isn't coming back from this." Timothy's voice was a low growl. "It's not fair," he muttered. "She ruined everything. She turned everyone against me." Margaret's patience finally snapped. "No, Tim. You did this to yourself," she said, her voice rising. "You refused her service. You humiliated her. And instead of apologizing, you doubled down on your arrogance and hatred. She didn't make you say those things. She didn't make you shout at those protesters. Those were your choices, and now you're paying the price." Timothy glared at her, but he couldn't muster a response. He turned away, his shoulders sagging under the weight of her words. Margaret took a deep breath, her tone softening once more. "You're losing everything, Tim. The restaurant, the respect of this community, and maybe even me. But this isn't just about what you've lost. It's about what you could have saved if you'd only swallowed your pride." Timothy didn't reply. He simply stared out the window at the darkened street, his reflection a ghost of the man he used to be. Back at her apartment, Alicia sat on her couch, the quiet a welcome contrast to the chaos of the courthouse. She set her bag down and leaned back, letting out a long breath. For the first time in weeks, the tension in her chest began to ease. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, lighting up with a flood of messages. She picked it up and scrolled through them, her heart swelling as she read words of encouragement and congratulations. "You're an inspiration, Alicia. Thank you for standing up for what's right. This is a win for all of us. Justice served." One message in particular caught her attention. "You didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for all of us. Thank you." Alicia set the phone down, her eyes brimming with tears. She had started this fight to demand justice for herself, but along the way, it had become about so much more. It was about showing others that they didn't have to accept injustice, that they had a voice and the power to make it heard. The next morning, Alicia met Rachel at a small cafe near the courthouse. The two women sat by the window, their coffee cups steaming as they reflected on the case. "What happens now?" Alicia asked, stirring her drink thoughtfully. "Well," Rachel began, leaning back in her chair, "Carter's Steakhouse will be under mandatory anti-discrimination oversight. Not that it'll matter much. I doubt the place will survive another month. His reputation is beyond repair, and the damages he owes you will be the final blow." Alicia nodded, her expression contemplative. "It's not just about him, though," she said softly. "It's about what this case represents. If it helps others feel empowered to stand up, then it was worth it." Rachel smiled. "You've already done that. You've shown people that fighting back can lead to real change. You've made a difference, Alicia." Alicia returned the smile, lifting her cup in a small toast. "To making a difference." Rachel clinked her cup against Alicia's. "And to holding people accountable." In the weeks that followed, the impact of the trial rippled outward. Local businesses began reevaluating their policies, ensuring they were in compliance with anti-discrimination laws. Community organizations used the case as a rallying cry, pushing for broader protections against racial bias. Alicia found herself at the center of a movement, invited to speak at events and panels where her story inspired others to take a stand. She spoke with a quiet strength, sharing her journey not as a victim, but as someone who had refused to be silenced. One evening, after a particularly moving event, Alicia stood on the steps of the community center, gazing out at the city lights. The fight had taken so much out of her, but it had also given her something invaluable: a sense of purpose, a platform to create change. Taking a deep breath, she whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." I hope you enjoyed that powerful story. I've picked out 2 stories for you that I think you would love. Have a great day.